Hello, my name is Gurpreet Dillon and I'm a professor of information security at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. The focus of our discussion today is cyberstalking. There's clearly no doubt that cyberstalking has become a menace to a society. There are clearly more women who are victims of cyberstalking than men. Various laws have also been created. Nevertheless, the problem exists and persists, and we are seeing an increased incidence of cyberstalking cases around the country and internationally. It is unfortunate that many a times cyberstalking cases end up in committing suicide, particularly in the preteens and the teen years. There have been a number of documented cases where children have gone ahead and committed suicide. The problem of cyberstalking is not just restricted to children, the teenagers, and young adults, but it is also fast spreading into the corporate world where different means have been used to stalk individuals, to trouble them, to gain access to their identity and abuse that identity in some shape and form. May it be through emails, may it be through messages on various message boards. Clearly, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. The more we talk about it, perhaps the better we'll be able to understand it. So I will be discussing various facets of cyberstalking today and how we can perhaps protect ourselves and our children and our organizations from this very dangerous aspect of information technology. There were two particular cases which brought the problem of cyberstalking to the fore in the very recent past. It even brought President Obama out to criticize the manner in which cases had been handled and also to increase awareness of the menace that cyberstalking brings to the society. In both these cases, the individuals had committed suicide after having fallen victim to cyberstalking. Whatever may have been the circumstances of those particular cases, and irrespective of the fact that the perpetrators were caught and prosecuted, but young lives were lost indeed. And that is what is a sad part of cyberstalking, particularly when people commit suicide because they cannot face the society for whatever reason it might have been. But how do we actually address these issues? What psychological impact it has on individuals, particularly when we are dealing with teenagers and young adults who seem to be more vulnerable, or even in the case of women who have a higher incidence of being stalked physically or even online. How do we prevent these things? How do we ensure that individuals stay protected in a largely interconnected society that we have created for ourselves today? These are some of the challenges that exist. We might be able to create laws and regulations which are going to bring people to justice, those who engage in these wrong activities, but at what cost? At the cost of a loss of a loved one or an individual, cost of having lost your job as a consequence of cyber stalking or cyberbullying of some sort. And those are very real cases. Those are very real scenarios that need to be addressed and understood and managed adequately. One of the ways in which we can do is to educate and ensure awareness of individuals that cyberstalking is a crime which is punishable by the law, and ensure that people come forward and report if they do suspect some kind of cyberstalking or any related activity where they feel that they are being bullied in one shape or form. And hopefully, in the end, we will be able to curtail these increased incidents of cyberbullying. They're going to stay largely because our increased dependence on social networks for our social communications, it has just simply changed the way in which we interact. Research has shown that victims who have been cyberbullied several times a week have a very low self-esteem, and this can potentially have a significant impact on their personality and how they see themselves, how they perceive their environment, how they perceive their peers. There's some research that I was involved with several years ago where we tracked how a given teenager who had been abused at a very young age, at the age of 14, and what the consequences of that abuse were on this particular individual when he became an adult. One of the things that became very clear in this piece of research was that this person became a very angry individual and really could not hold on to his relationships in later years. This suggested that even though it may have been an isolated incident in the preteens or the teen years, the impact of abuse or bullying or some kind of encounter at an early age has a long lasting effect on a given person. So similarly, some of the things that we see in cyberbullying do have a long lasting impact, and they affect individuals in different ways. Uh, Now, since we do not know or come to know of cyber stalking and bullying cases soon enough, hence we don't know how to remedy these problems soon enough, and these stay as a scar on an individual for an extended period of time. Now, how they manifest themselves in later years is up for grabs. We don't know. There have been cases, of course, documented cases where such individuals have actually become very violent and they haven't been able to hold on to their relationships, particularly in the case of cyber stalking at a very young age. Of course, we have seen cases where people have committed suicide, but what is even more worrying is the psychological makeup that gets changed as a consequence of cyberbullying or cyber stalking at a young age. That's an impressionable period of time in an individual's growing up phase, and to have a negative effect downstream is not necessarily the best thing to do. Now, we might have these things happen at an individual level, but organizations suffer as well where people have been stalked. You are essentially creating a bunch of disgruntled employees who potentially have been stalked, and those disgruntled employees are perhaps the worst kind of employees to have in an organization. Not that I'm not suggesting you kick them out of the organization, but the statistics tells us that 80% or so of our cyber crimes occur because someone within the organization is essentially subverting the controls, and to a large extent this is because of disgruntled employees who are abusing the systems or are just frustrated. So when you have low self-esteem of an individual because of that person's engagement or his brush against cyber stalking, cyberbullying of sorts, we just don't know what implications that is going to have on him or her becoming a disgruntled employee in later years, and how that might translate into a potential cybersecurity problem. So it is a very important issue to address for organizations and for society at large to curb the cyber stalking practices and ensure that proper kind of controls exist such that they can be identified and managed. It is a little unfortunate that with every advance in technology and our ability to do things in a more efficient and effective manner, there are all these negative aspects which show up. Now, it has become very easy for individuals to find people online. There are services available where you pay a little bit of money, anywhere from $5 to $50, and you can find the name, address, current location of an individual. There are sites such as People Finder. There are sites such as Google Person Finder, and they were all created with good intent. I mean, Google Person Finder in particular has been used in crisis situations, and currently there's a beta version, a test mode running in Japan. um, because whenever you have a disaster, um, these kind of sites help you locate individuals, your lost loved ones and families. So there is a real good application of such sites in reconnecting lost members of the family. But there are negative consequences of this as well, because it is easier for us to find the current location, the names and addresses, and could be used potentially for stalking purposes. And there are cases where they have been used for stalking purposes. So any technological advance is a double-edged sword. There are obviously positive aspects that any technology promises, but there are negative ones too, and it is our role as citizens to realize what the positive ones and negative ones are, so that we can control the negative consequences and give a boost to the positive aspects of. Recently, HuffPost ran a series of very interesting articles on cyberstalking, where they do talk about various cases, growing incidents of cyberstalking, and the increased nature of cyberbullying, and how email harassment has also caused a lot of problems in among people in companies. Um, they also noted in one of the studies that online harassment, especially on Facebook, had increased dramatically and was actually more than what you would traditionally see in face-to-face or physical stalking cases. They in particular single out the nearby friends option in Facebook and how that can potentially be used or abused for stalking purposes. So there's several such instances that this particular article in HuffPost notes, um, and they also present several cases where people have been prosecuted. In particular, they talk about a Florida case where a particular hacker stole nude photographs of women and posted them back onto their Facebook pages. There's a case of an ex-teacher who hacked into students' Facebook page and wrote love letters on the blog. All sorts of crazy people. Now, there are crazy people out there, so I think the question arises is being aware of them and what actions that we can take to prevent online, offline harassment and ensure that stalking does not take place. One of the basic principles that has been suggested is that you do not connect with individuals you don't know or have not interacted with in a physical domain, particularly when it comes to online social networks. So it is very important to have some good practices in place as far as cybersecurity is concerned, which would enable individuals and institutions to prevent the abuse of the technology and hence prevent cyber stalking. There are several social networking sites which have been known to be unmoderated and conducive for cyberbullying and cyber stalking. I'm going to pick on at least two of the ones that appear on this particular list here on this slide. One is ask.fm, which is a Latvia-based site which allows people to exchange messages anonymously, and because of the anonymous and um, um, nature and unmoderated nature of this particular social media site, it can have pretty negative consequences for individuals who engage in communication here and can potentially lead to cyberbullying as well. The other site, Snapchat, which is actually a very popular social media site amongst teenagers. um, allows you to take short videos and send them across, and these videos remain valid for up to 24 hours, and then they get deleted off the server. However, there are ways of saving those messages, and once you save those messages, there's a potential of them being used, and this site has often been used as a sexting site, as a sexting app, and there have been several cases where it has been used for sexting, and there have been people who've been prosecuted as well. So if one was to stay away from certain sites, I would at least identify these 8 which are problematic, and largely because of the unmoderated nature and the anonymous nature of the sites. I mean, they obviously were created because of positive benefits, but they have been abused over the years, and are quite dangerous, particularly for children and teenagers. So the question that arises is, how do we protect ourselves? There are at least 5 things that I would recommend that need to be put in place to ensure protection from cyberstalking, cyberbullying. First and foremost is use anonymous emails, something like Hotmail or Yahoo, and have an email ID which does not identify you as a non-descriptive ID. Use such an ID to for most of your communication. Keep your main email private, or share with people you know, and you particularly need to be very cautious with respect to public computers, in cafes or in libraries. Don't use them, or if you have to use them, make sure that you log out properly and delete your credentials thereafter. Second is, when you're creating your online profiles, and we are in the age of social media, be very vague as far as what you put in your profile. Do not disclose your exact location or travel plans or the names of your children if you're married, or have them, or birthdays, phone numbers. Just hide them. Or if you do want to have an email address out there, create a separate one which is actually pretty vague and people cannot identify you. You should remember that 1 in 5 cyberstalking victims have been targeted through one social media site or the other. And be friends with people who you have met in person. Don't just go around making friends online who you don't know. You don't know where they're coming from. They could be not so good people that you normally think they would be. Thirdly, make sure that you change your passwords often. We often recommend this exercise for your debit cards and bank accounts, but do that for your email addresses as well, for your social media accounts as well. Make sure that you change them occasionally, because over a period of time they can get abused, and it becomes easier to find a pattern for the hackers to identify what your password might be. So it's a good idea to clean them out occasionally and get rid of the old ones, and just create a new set of passwords and unique identifiers for yourself. Um, Fourthly, if you do see or perceive that there is a threat, consider it seriously. Don't brush it aside. All such threats need to be reported. They need to be documented, and they need to be addressed almost immediately. In any country, irrespective of where you are, there is law, and there are authorities who deal with cyberstalking cases. May it be in the U.S. or Western Europe or Asia or Australia, wherever. There is a corresponding law in the U.S. Revert to the FBI, revert to any kind of an agency in your country which is dealing with any aspect of stalking. It is important to report potential abuse to them soon enough, sooner than you might imagine. And finally, always delete your personal information, photos from your old phones and computers before you sell them and dispose them off. These are some basic housekeeping exercises that you should engage in order to protect yourself from being abused, from cyberbullying, from cyberstalking, and only then will you be in a better position to control your personal information. I hope you enjoyed listening, and this segment was informative. Um, and I'll come back later with another episode. Thank you very much.